that we want to give Joel his time on stage without any interruption. So unless he asks you to participate, I would ask that you please remember to mute.
And for what it's worth, I will be asking people to participate. So,
so that is Joel. Joel is going to talk with us tonight. Joel has played many roles in his Agile career. He's been an engineer. He's been Agile coach of sorts. He's been an executive therapist and a self-proclaimed purple squirrel. And I will let you ask him about what all that means as he talks to us tonight. So Joel is going to take us through a different way of looking at the classic Agile transformation, a little bit of psychology, a little bit of schmoozing, a little bit of sales, all to make it a successful transformation. So what I will do without further ado is let Joel take it away. So I'm going to stop sharing, Joel, and you can have the party.
okay, great. You know, I'm not sure about the executive therapy piece. I don't think I've people have mumbled about that, but we don't talk about that in public. So, in any case, I'm Joel. Let's see if my screen will share.
It does.
Looking okay.
Woohoo.
Awesome.
Yes.
Great. So, how to make progress faster? You know, I'm sure, and actually I should just ask, out of the group we have, how many people do we have here today? 58. Oh, good group. We usually have a mix of coaches, scrum masters, product owners, people who are just generally involved with Agile in various ways. We're all in places where we want to make progress faster, right? We look around and say, wouldn't that be great? So this presentation, I'm going to make a promise. I might be challenging some things that we as Agilists hold dear in the name of maybe being more effective. So I'd like to just ask that we come in with an open mind and see where we go. So what is this all about? You know, we do Agile transformation, right? Does this make you happy? Does it make you sad? Does it make you neutral? A bunch of people find different places on the spectrum, but let's say, you know, you're an Agilist. What is that? What is it really? Well, you know, you're an Agilist. What do you think you're there to do? If we're talking about, you know, the client or the company you work for, what do you think you're there to do? This is your first chance to participate. Somebody say a word or two about what do you think you're there to do as an Agilist?
Well, Joel, this is Amy, and as a coach, I'm there to be a pain in everyone's butt. They don't want me there, and they're going to let me know.
Uh-huh. How about somebody different?
Educate. Make things work.
Sorry, say again?
Make things work.
Make things work. Okay, cool. What else?
Educate.
Educate. Yeah.
Enable change.
Enable change.
Work with others to get things done.
Work with others to get things done. Okay.
Ship product.
Yeah. What do they want you to do?
Oh, well, what am I there for? To help make happen what they presumably want. Otherwise, they wouldn't have me in there.
So great transition. What do they want you to do versus why the reason we think we're there? In reality, right? We're in there in the trenches. What do they really want us to do?
They want the title of Jeff's book, right? Twice the work and half the time.
Uh-huh. What else?
Solve their problems.
Deliver on time and under budget.
On time and under budget. Yeah.
The right thing fast.
The right thing fast. You know, these two sets of things don't exactly sound like they're exactly the same, right? And we get confronted with this all the time. You know, we end up in places where we've gone in with a set of assumptions about what it is we think we're supposed to do. And then we get a whole bunch of stuff about what they want us to do that may or may not line up at all to the thing that we think we're supposed to do. And it kind of leads occasionally to this thought of like, you know, have you ever questioned the nature of your reality? For those who've seen Westworld, this might make a little sense. And even if not, isn't it weird? We get brought in as coaches to do all this agile stuff, and yet there's this mismatch of what we end up doing versus what we think we're supposed to be doing. Well, there's a lot of ways to question the nature of your reality. A lot of us have heard about this idea of learn to do agile, you become agile, right? Shu, ha, ri, do. That's the right thing, right? That's how you get to agile. Yes, no?
Yes.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so hold on to your seatbelts. There's a thing called correlation versus causation. This chart proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that adding more arcades will generate more computer science doctorates. The correlation is 98.51%. Anybody doing any research would be totally thrilled with this. Except maybe it's not a trigger for creating more doctorates, right? If we take a look back at us, is this correlation or causation? Does what we do really trigger the things we think it would do? What if our agile behaviors are not correlated with agile beliefs? They're correlated with agile beliefs, but they're not the cause of agility. What do you think about that statement? What does it mean to you? What if our agile behaviors are correlated with agile beliefs, but they're not the cause of agility? In other words, do doesn't create agility. Is this deep thought? Or Joel, I think you're crazy.
Yes and yes.
Yes,
Say
and yes.
more. Say more.
Okay. So, they want you to help them do the agile things, right? Have they decided to be agile? I know we've all been in this place where the answer is no. Uh-oh, right? They want help doing the agile things, but they haven't really decided to be agile. They just want us to do the agile things for them. So, which they made the decision for us to be there? Do we even know? For folks here, do you know who made the decision that resulted in Agile being present or attempting to be present in the environment?
We think we do. We think we do.
You think
but
we do? Okay.
Probably wrong.
What do you think we do? What do you think we know? Like for your case, Amy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, normally I think it's because the person with the highest budget said, I need someone to get in here and implement these classes that everyone took. So I think it's the person writing the checks.
Could be. Yeah. Oh, by the way, there's a comment in chat about recording and asking for consent. Did we actually do that? It's a good point.
Yes, it's always. Oh, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
I don't think we actually do that.
Okay.
That's a good point, and I'll make note of it for future.
Okay.
If nothing else, it should be a slide. Thank you.
Yeah, because people should know that that's what's going on. Yeah. Okay. So, which they made the decision, and do we know? Was it the IT exec who got it funded? Was it the team members? Is it middle managers? Is it somebody who actually is in the business, customer facing, who decided this is the thing we want to do to improve the business? Was it somebody who's a delivery lead? Was it all of them? Was it none of them?
Actually,
Go ahead.
Kind of answering a question with a semi-related question, and that is, what is quote-unquote the null hypothesis? That is, suppose whoever it was who made that decision to go agile didn't make any decision at all. What kind of development environment would that organization normally have?
Hmm?
I mean, Agile is common these days. It might be Agile. It could be pure waterfall. I mean, what's the default is my question.
So you're asking, if the organization didn't have this push for Agile, who would they be?
Right.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. You know, and how does that relate to what we've been asked to do and what we think we're supposed to be doing there, right? And by the way, I realize a lot of what we're talking about here is not the classic Agile speak, right? It's not the, oh, this is how you need to do Scrum and Kanban and roles and metrics, and sure, I can talk about that stuff. What we're talking about here is all the other stuff around it that can determine whether or not we're successful at getting any of that to work. So who needs to be all in? Does anybody need to be all in, or does everybody need to be all in for this to work? What do you think?
It depends.
Everybody.
In my experience, the executives have to be fully in, having a actual understanding of what it is that they're signing up for, and there also has to be team level people that are willing to give it a try.
Mm-hmm. What's your experience been with that being true?
Pretty much everywhere that I've been.
Cool. I might say from my experience, lucky, but that's great. Anybody have other experiences?
Well, I would agree with him. I mean, at least in my team, which has been a large organization, everyone has to be all in or else it's not going to work. I've actually seen the people who are not all in leave. So we're left with now the people who are at least reasonably all in or all in.
That's great. And it's interesting. It's maybe a lead into my next slide is how do you get someone all in? I suppose one way is you remove the ones who aren't, or make it a place that they so don't want to be that they leave on their own. That's one way. You know, a way that we think about doing that is, yeah, training, that'll do it. If somebody's not in, will training do it? What do you think? It might.
It's not a guarantee.
Not a guarantee. Why would training maybe not get somebody to buy in?
Middle management is often fearful of what their role will be in an Agile organization.
Why would that be?
Because there's no role for them in Agile by the book.
Right. I'm not in that picture, right? Along with a lot of the company. I'm not in that picture.
And if people have their mind set on something and that this way, that my way works and your way won't, then even with the training, they may tend to double down on their view of the world, not your view of the world.
You're also trying, this is Sandra, you're also trying to change behavior, which is much harder to do than just training people.
So Sandra, if I told you to change your behavior, how successful would I be?
Oh, it would be very hard to do. It has to come from the top down, and then the constant belief in it and the adoption for it. And that takes a really long time to implement.
Yeah. So, you know, it's funny, I talk about this sometimes. It's not in the deck, but, you know, imagine if we were, since Amy brought up therapy, so imagine if I just snap my fingers and everybody in this meeting is a therapist, okay? And I'm going to hand out decks of index cards to everybody. And you're going to have 10, each person's going to have 10 index cards. Each index card is going to have the name of a person on it and the name of a problem and the change that you need to inspire in that person. And so those are your 10 patients, right? there's a hitch. None of those people believe they have that problem, and they're not interested in making the change. What's your success rate going to be?
Very low.
Very low. Does that sound like sometimes what we're trying to do as Agilists?
Well, you really do need the willing and deserving to invite you in first. I mean,
Yeah.
If you're not understanding what their issues are and how you can help with agile principles and practices, then it's probably not going to go very far.
Right. And this is why so many organizations, they at this point in their history, they've gotten a little bit sour on dogmatic agilism. You know, the follow this exact litany and you will be better, regardless of how you feel about it or what you think. And I thought this next slide is an interesting one to think about. No one changes unless they want to. Not if you beg them, not if you shame them, not if you use reason, emotion, or tough love. The only one thing that makes someone change is their own realization that they need to do it. And there's only one time it will happen, when they decide they're ready. Which is kind of interesting because, you know, if I look at my own life, that's the way it is, right? I can know that something needs to change, but it's not going to happen until I decide I'm ready. Outside forces might help that to happen. But now we go back to this idea of the top-down transformation. And that the way to make this happen is have some leader apply force to the organization in one fashion or another. There's a humongous difference between compliance and change. Force can generate compliance. It cannot generate change, right? This is what we're talking about for change. Are we there to generate compliance, or are we there to generate change?
And I'm wondering, there's an organization I'm with that essentially runs on consensus, and it's actually where I live, not where I work. So it's a condo, and we run it that way. Long story. Can ask me offline if you want the full story. But there are a couple of things the way it runs. First of all, everybody who moves in has to buy into the idea of the consensus operation. And we have, I mean, the one big thing that gets people to accept that is they're not going to plunk down a whole several $100,000 for a place to live where everybody else buys into something they don't want. So we sort of have a start already. But the main thing, the main rule is, procedure is, you need to have a solid majority of people who want to, I'll say agile, who want to go agile, and that everybody else is willing to stand aside and let it happen, that they may or may not participate, but they're not going to actively block it. So it'll only go through if you have a working majority who want to do it, and everybody else is willing to either to stand aside, not participate, but not block it. And then something goes through. And to reach that stage, there's a lot of meetings, a lot of discussion, and everybody has the right to speak up. And initially there are a goodly number of people who will block, and needs to have a long discussion, and you get most of the blocks to either agree or to stand aside. So that's about a 1-hour talk I just gave in 2 minutes.
Cool. Yeah.
But I think that could work for Agile as long as the organization adheres to those kind of consensus principles.
It can. That's one of the possible paths. Absolutely. So if we think about the work that we do we ever get into a position where we say to ourselves, well, you know what, this one is just being obstinate, so I'm just going to apply power and I'll make them comply, and that's good enough? We never do that as coaches, scrum masters, product owners. I know we've never done that before, but yeah, I'm seeing smiles, I'm seeing laughs. I'm not seeing anybody hiding their head yet.
So there's a way that I approach that, and I have had some reasonable success with it, and that is giving people who are apprehensive about the change or even resistant a stake in the outcome, a stake in the change, and a seat at the table, what you call a seat at the table. And you pull them in and say, hey, look, work with me, give me some feedback on this, tell me what you like about it, what you don't like about it, and let's work with this. And you would be amazed at how invested people will sometimes get if suddenly now you've given them an audience.
Mm-hmm. And what you're doing is you're kind of taking the opposite of force, right? You're not there begging them, shaming them. Maybe there's reason, but it's not all. You know, you're getting them to that place. So, if we go a little bit further from here, we talked about how do you get somebody all in? What kind of in is that in? What does it mean even to say in on Agile? Or in on coaching?
Maybe to trust in the process and learning something new, knowing that, this is new to you. You don't know what, working in this new way is going to look like, but you're trusting in learning.
Any other thoughts? What kind of in is in when we talk about being in on this?
I think it's building relationships. I mean, I think that they're buying a little bit of you as much as what you're selling. Right.
When you're in, you're open to change.
Open to change.
Joel, I think it's agreeing with the process that Agile has established.
Being invested in trying new things.
Invested in trying new things.
I think it's
how Agile is about improvement. And I always ask the question, are you in on continuous improvement? And people look at me sideways. Oh, isn't that the game we're playing? Keep going. Yeah. Did somebody just say something? Sorry.
Rob was trying to say something before me, then I'll jump in.
Yeah, I was trying to say, I think in is a willingness to try an experiment in which you can inspect and adapt. Thanks for laughing at my part.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to throw in the aspect of self-sustaining. If they're in, they may carry on those practices if you leave.
So I'm going to propose, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, this is Pavet. I just wanted to say this. So I think before in, there is understanding the need. Like, is there a need for this acceptance to happen or not? Because there could be a certain way which might be working for them.
Yeah, like the another thing we've probably never heard is we're fine.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. We're fine. We don't need that. So, I guess I have maybe another thought to go along with these. They're all great. They've decided they want your help to go a specific direction.
Well, that's what I was just thinking about being in. Are you talking about being into being agile, or are you talking about in to accomplishing the goal of the project.
I think I'm talking about what kind of in, that the in is about in on the idea of a transformation.
Ah, okay.
And that you're going to help them with that.
Okay.
Because we go back to that picture of the plugs, right? One of the big disconnects in the plugs that sometimes we have is, yeah, sure, somebody says, yeah, we're going to hire a bunch of these people and we're going to do the agile things. And we come in and we assume that means they want us to help them do the agile thing or things. And the reality is they haven't decided they want your help to do the agile thing. They might want your help for something else, or they might want your help to make it look like they're doing the agile thing.
Mm.
But that's different. Yeah. So this is kind of, it turns out this is a really important piece. This is a little bit of a jump sideways. I'm going to be doing a couple of these detours as we go through. You think about organizational decisions, because we talked about a person being in, but what does it mean to have an organization that's in? So it turns out that as you add deciders to a process in an organization, the chance of any decision goes down dramatically as you add a number of deciders.
Mm.
Not your decision, any decision. This, by the way, was based on a sample of, I think, 3,000 companies done by CEB. This was, I think, 2015. And at that point, you have one decider, maybe the chance of a decision is 80%-ish. Adding one more person dropped it to 55. By the time you're out to 5.4, which was the average buying group size for their sample of companies, we're down to the range of like 38, 40%. You go to 6, it's down to 30%. How many people does it take for an organization to decide they want to do a transformation? Many, right? Somebody mentioned critical mass earlier. So we have this kind of interesting issue that the chance of decisions declines dramatically as you add deciders. How many are there? Where are they? Who should we focus on? When and how if we're trying to motivate this thing to get rolling? Landmines, and I'm calling this landmines. It's the hidden influencers. Earlier there was I think it was David talking about the having people step aside without getting in the way. That works as long as they're not a hidden opposer and they're just creating the theater that they're not in the way. People do this. So this, to me, it's funny. I started my career actually doing network engineering. I think about this as people network engineering. It's thinking about the organization as a network of things that are going on. And there are some design solutions for how do we help the organization get from place to place. What do you think about that thought? I realize this is far afield from I'm a scrum master for a team or I'm a coach for a few teams. It's looking at the organization writ large and how it fits together. Yeah. So now we've talked about a bunch of stuff. I have a question. Is coaching the answer to all these problems? Is servant leader the answer to all these problems? What do you think? I'm guessing that one of your answers is, hey, we're here, so come on, Joel, of course it is. But what do you think?
I think it depends on what kind of coaching we are talking about. If we are talking about the whole coaching framework where you are a trainer, mentor, coach, and kind of helping them to understand delivery as well as the system. So maybe coaching is the answer, but not only one thing if you are just people coaching or leadership coaching.
So it does depend on your thinking about what a coach is about, right? And so, we, as an Agile community, we are taught that coaching of various sorts, like the quadrant that you just talked about, is the answer, right? That we just need to maneuver the quadrant, and if we do it right, it'll all happen. Well, I'm going to come back to I just like this quote, have you ever questioned the nature of your reality? Our reality is we've been told that's the answer. So let's go to a quick definition of what coaching is. There are many definitions right up front, agreed, right? Many definitions. This one I kind of liked. It's from Jonathan Passmore, Excellent in Coaching. It's been around for a while. It's 2006. Coaching is a form of development in which an experienced person, called a coach, supports a learner or client in achieving a specific personal or professional goal by providing training and guidance. Now, whether that training and guidance is facilitation, training, coaching, mentoring, the details. So there are some implicit assumptions in this statement about what coaching is about, right? What do you notice in this definition of coaching? I guess for starters, is there anybody who wildly objects to this one? No? What do you notice about this definition?
The key is for the learner to take the action and have the motivation.
What else?
Well, one thing I've noted that the earlier said, well, what is coaching the answer? And on this one, it's saying it works if the question is how, but not if the question is whether.
That's a great way to put it. Yep. You get the sense of the storyline I'm weaving here. So if we go to the next one is, oops, if they're not in, it's your goal, not theirs. So if they're not in, we're not doing coaching, right? Coaching is it's not the thing that's designed to solve for not in. It's designed to solve for somebody's in, and you're helping them get to the goal that they know they want to get to. Maybe that's why it's so hard to solve this problem with a coaching approach. Boy, the room has gotten really quiet. I told you I'd try to challenge you today. So you're trying to use coaching to solve a non-coaching problem. How's that working for you? It must be a really long day. This was supposed to be funny.
Hey, this is Marie.
Marie, yes.
So this is something that I've actually been doing some of my own research on, basically how to get people motivated. So I started reading this book called Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does. I'll send it in the chat. I'm only on chapter 1 and I'm already really into it.
Cool.
But it basically says that everyone's motivated by something. So it's not that people lack motivation. It's you have to figure out what motivates them, talk to them about it, and then see how you can align what motivates them to the bigger goal of whatever your team is trying to do.
Right.
So the more that you can find out what people's main motivation is at work, that's how you can help kind of explain to them your motivations and explain to them more agile mindsets and try to align how they think to be like, oh, well, that actually is kind of agile, and make those connections.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just talking it out, not so much training or coaching, but more so like doing your own digging into what motivates each person on your team and in your organization.
Right. That's great. And that's an example of what I mean, that the sort of pure coaching solution set, it actually isn't up the center line of what it's needed to solve that problem. It's useful. It's definitely useful, but not sufficient to really handle the whole thing.
Hey, Joe?
Oh, go ahead. Yep.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Speaking of what motivates people and how to get people to work with the agile process, it's like, and my 2 teams is one of my teams that I need to work with them and and try to be a team player with them instead of hitting them head on the head with a hammer for how to do the process.
Mm.
So instead of saying, okay, you have to have this ceremony this way, and this one this way, and this one this way, and this day this way, at the very end, you get all the processes, you know what I mean, the end of the sprint. And then for about a year and a half, I've been doing a little bit adjunct switching of the ceremonies, which the teams love, because they want to plan before the planning day starts.
It's supposed to be adaptive, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet there was a Scrum Master that says to me, I'm all with the process. You need to change. It's like, no, I've been doing this for a year and a half and it's working out great. Because the team
remember that slide with the butterfly about making people change? Yeah.
So I'm gonna get it, but it's gonna take him a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's got all these qualifications, all these certifications, and I realized you have to empathize, you have to agree with the team, you have to work with them, and then once you get them on your side,
right,
then you can work with them other things.
Right.
Oh, you want to try this process? They'll be willing to do that.
Right. But at that point, they have decided they're in with you.
Yes,
you didn't force it. You helped them get to the place where they were in.
Right. So anyway, I want to share that with everybody because you can do your process thing and try to hit some, nails on just like this guy's doing with the saw and the pizza. That's just not going to work. Anyways, thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
You have a minute? I wanted to just take a different point of view. I want to take the point of view from the sports arena. And in the sports arena, there, in the NBA, there used to be a coach, 2 assistant coaches, and an equipment manager. And what's happened in the world of the NBA now is that there are nutritional coaches and weightlifting coaches and aerobic coaches and shooting coaches. And even there are perceptual coaches, perceptual training. And what's happened is that the game has so rapidly evolved. And the decision-making in the game has increased, even though the number of players in the game, the latency has decreased, the number of passes, the time to decision has decreased. That maybe the hypothesis is that we don't have sufficient number of coaches and sufficient number of specializations in the coaching. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. And actually, thank you. And because the sports analogy is kind of interesting because last year, maybe it was the year before, not all that long ago, I realized that we talk about coaching in the way that we're just talking about it. But many people who are leaders in organizations have a very different vision of what a coach is, right? Their vision of a coach is Belichick. That is not a servant leader, I'm here to help you, right? In some ways it is, but it was very interesting. I had a real serious discussion with an SVP at a company I was working with a few years ago who said, look, Joel, enough with the theory, enough with the academic stuff, enough with the the lightweight, blah, blah, blah. I expect you to hold these people and shake them around until they do what they can do. You're a coach, right? And that's what sort of got me to realize, oh, wait a minute, there are these different mental models of what coaching is about. And there are times for that kind of coaching. We're talking about the other kind. But yeah. So if coaching isn't the answer, then what is? I'm told I have a lot of pop culture references, but so be it. For anybody who's seen Pirates of the Caribbean with or without their kids, what makes you think Barbossa will give his ship to you? Let's just say it's a matter of leverage. This is Captain Jack Sparrow, otherwise known as Johnny Depp, about to steal a British ship with only one other person helping. So, what makes you think Barbosa will give his ship up to you? Oh, let's just say it's a matter of leverage. So, there are some things in here. How do you change an organization's thinking? Well, like with people. Oh yeah, by the way, organization built of people. We like to think of sort of their anonymous blobs. There's a bunch of people. Same thing. No one changes unless they want to. Not if you beg them, not if you shame them, not if you use reason, emotion, or tough love. There's only one thing that makes someone change. Their own realization they need to do it. And there's only one time it will happen, when they decide they're ready. So how do you bring an organization to this place? Well, I like to think there's a better question. How do you change an organization's desires and enable a shared belief that systemic change is possible? I've found personally that the second one is one of the biggest obstacles to transformation. It's the disbelief that change is possible, that the system can be changed. Have you ever run into that before? So until they believe that that change is possible, we get pushed into using force to solve for this stuff, which doesn't actually solve for it. The best you can do is get compliance. The problem again is that once you decide you're okay with compliance, you're no longer getting change. Compliance only works while somebody's watching. And that's really the bad news, right? Because as people are trying to trigger change, we feel like sometimes I can't get them to pick up the ball. Well, okay, that's not their fault. Might not be our fault either, but it's certainly not theirs. And the path to it is to help them decide they've got a desire and a belief that it's possible. So what do you get some really more details as I comment in chat, or catch the ball in Brady's case. So I call this organizational systems thinking. To continue on with the analogy with Johnny Depp, where's the leverage? Right? Some questions I ask myself. Where's the leverage? What kind of leverage is that? Where are the nodes of leverage? And here's, by the way, where it's starting to do a deep dive into maybe a whole new topic area for some people in thinking about organizations as this big network of people. People form a node, they form a network, right? Like in the picture. There are people throughout the organization, they're connected in various ways. Where are the nodes of leverage or leverage, depending on how you want to pronounce it, in the organization? And what I mean by that is people, situations, events, and outcomes. There are certain events that can be levers for changing things. There are certain people who are strategic and their leverage points in the organization. There are certain outcomes. You know, we've heard about the burning platform thing, right? Something goes boom. That can be an outcome that is a big point of leverage for some kinds of change. How are the leverage nodes connected in time, space, and communication pathways? Yeah, was there a question? I thought I saw a hand moving somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about an outcome being, for example, a quick win.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that can be enough to provide that leverage to move forward, get people believing.
Yeah. And by the way, I should back up a step. This is not just an abstract slide. This is, as I maneuver through an organization, this stuff is in the back of my mind through every conversation, through every interaction, is what am I in front of? Does this thing in front of me, does this situation, does this person, does this outcome, does this event, is it a leverage point? How is it connected to other stuff, right? And where does that lead? Because what that does is it gets you, most of this leverage stuff is transient. In other words, it's not long lasting. It's there, some of it is long lasting, some isn't. But a lot of these leverage points are transient. In other words, they're only around for a little while. They're topic and timing specific. Some person might be a really incredible leverage point for a particular thing. So, and you have to have the skills and capabilities to fluidly meet these instant opportunities and figure out what to do with them. Wanted to come back to Michael's question in chat about why would you want leverage at all? Seems like an external change rather than intrinsic desire. That's a really good question. I am not talking about leverage in this, or leverage, in the sense of applying pressure. I'm talking about it in terms of recognizing where there are places where you can help people to think differently, to make a different decision about what they want, and how that would then influence the rest of the organization. Does that make sense, Michael? Since you put that in chat. Yeah. So it's sort of what point on the compass you're coming from. It's not the high pressure control kind of pressure. It's sort of where, maybe this make more sense as we go a little bit further forward. So another piece of thing, another set of things that I start thinking about in these organizational systems is, what are the organizational stories? What stories do people tell each other about this organization? Those stories are different in different parts of the organization. Again, sort of in that idea of the network and leverage points. If, let's say, we've got two parts of the organization and they tell wildly different stories about each other, that's really useful in thinking about how you can start approaching coaching with that organization. It could be something as simple as when organizational group 1 says something about organizational group 2, you could go to them and say, well, how do you know that? If you happen to know that they have a really different perspective. Have you ever talked to them about that? If, for instance, to get back to this leverage map, what if you realize that aligning these two groups and keeping them from throwing things at each other could be the leverage point that gets a whole bunch of other things to happen in harmony in the organization? Well, that's an identification of a leverage point in terms of this network, right? It's that if I could help solve for this one thing, help them to notice something that changes the way they look at things, that could then unleash a bunch of other good stuff. Does that make sense? So one is where are the organizational stories? What do they tell you about incentives and competition? Every story tells you something about incentives and competition. You must have an example. You've got stories all over the companies you work with. What's an example of an organizational story that you've heard? Anybody?
Joel, it's Don here. I'll jump in and kind of aligned to some of the thinking where Michael was going with this is still not 100% on board around the whole leverage piece, because even organizations or departments within the organization can typically be described as people. An organization takes on the characteristics of people, usually the people that work there. Yeah. And so you're still looking to say, well, is there that intrinsic desire to be great at an organizational level, at a department level, whatever that may be. And so I don't know that treating the organization or the systems any differently than I would treat a person or a group of people feels out of alignment for me, that I think it would take this, and I have taken this similar approach of, well, what are those desires? What is your why as an organization?
Yeah.
Put something in there about that earlier. So.
Right, and that it might be we're using different words. That's to me, that's tightly connected to what are the organizational stories, what are the incentives, the competition, what's the thinking pattern. The thinking patterns in this part of the organization might be really different than that one. And these things are not really sort of agile things, right? They're about the people and how they connect together and what influences they have on each other. So another one is, what do they tell you about fear? What do they tell you about fear? Why do people not change? One of the reasons they don't change is fear. And one of the ways you can find out about fear very directly is to listen carefully to the organizational stories.
That's an interesting one. I just had a thought cross my mind that one of the reasons people change is because of fear.
Sometimes, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, as an example, a few years ago, I was working with an insurance company. We had a bunch of POs working with a release train of teams, and I took a bunch of POs out to dinner. And we were talking about a particular improvement that seemed like it would make sense that they were talking around. We spent about 15 or 20 minutes on it. And finally, the conversation stops. Everybody looks at one of the product owners and they say, well, yeah, so Joel, there's something you should know. There's this guy, Frank, who used to work here 7 years ago. He tried that and he got fired. So here's this piece of organizational story about a fear of going to a particular place. Without knowing that, you wouldn't know that, oh, this is the reason for the opposition. And then you can work with it. Another one is, what does the packaging of fact versus story tell you about intent? This is going to take a little explanation. Some of you who know clean language and Caitlin Walker's work might know about the clean feedback model. The concept of evidence versus inference, of fact versus story, right? What's an example? I'll trot out an example. Actually, something I heard today. We were talking about a problem that is related to some communication between a developer group and a QA person. Somebody said, yeah, QA always wants to. Is that a fact?
Sounds a lot more like superstition.
Yeah, right? It's a story. It's not something you can observe or hear. It's a story that somebody made up about the things they heard or saw. And so figuring out how much of what you're hearing is actual observables and how much is story about what's happening is really handy. It's the stories about what's happening that tell you about these other things. And if organizations or people are stuck in story and they can't get back to fact, which some are, that can be the thing that unblocks the progress. Because until you can get them out of story, everybody has their own X-Files story about what's going on. That doesn't make it true. So, what does this packaging tell you about intent, right? And what social games and patterns are present and why? What do I mean by social game? Some of you may have heard of the drama triangle. There's this book that preceded that. It's called Games People Play by Eric Byrne, way back from, I think, the 70s. It's basically about this idea that we as people, we're social animals. And we don't just play games like hopscotch. We play social games too. How about the one where somebody's trying to get something done and another person opposes them all the time? Maybe that's actually a social game. It's not really opposition. It was really funny because I was, a couple of months ago, working a really tough problem in one chunk of the organization I'm in. And it all of a sudden occurred to me that these two parts of the organization were playing a social game with each other. This one would blame that one for a particular problem. That one would blame this one for a particular problem. I started coaching towards a solution, and they both got upset because that would stop the game. There was advantage they were getting out of being able to play the game. So this is the other part, is sort of where are the social games, what patterns are there, and why? Because sometimes we go in to solve something, and if we rip it out or have them rip it out, it's actually a net negative for them unless we find a different solution for the reason the game was there. So you might be thinking at this point, well, okay, that's all great, but how do I convince them? Well, it's my belief that asking how do I convince them is to have already lost. It's pretty obvious from the stuff we talked about before, right? Because convincing somebody is the same thing as pressuring them. It's the same thing as externally, same telling, controlling. So for every interaction or intervention, continual awareness of who is this act in service of? We as Agilists, true for me as much as anybody else, have to be constantly aware, is this act that I'm doing right now, is this thing I'm doing in service of me? Is it in service of you? Is it in service of the organizational system? It's uncomfortable to realize how many of the things I think about doing and pull myself back from were in service of me, not of the system or the people I'm working with. You know, getting angry or not getting angry, getting pushy or getting despondent or walking away or whatever, because they won't, that's in service of me. That's not in service of them. That's me trying to impose a change that I believe is the right change. So being aware of these interplays, sort of the personal social games, is also really helpful. You know, who is this act in service of? What is the root problem of the symptom? We see a lot of things in organizations. Just because there's a symptom doesn't mean that's the problem. Would solving this problem increase leverage towards opening up opportunity? Again, what I mean by leverage is not power, but essentially leverage towards an opportunity. And is this problem material to the business? What does that mean to you? What does material to the business mean to you? Finance folks are like, yeah, I know what that is. What does it mean to you?
Do both the leaders and the players see it the same way?
Mm-hmm. It makes a difference that everybody cares about. Not just IT.
Right.
Right. Not just the developers. It makes a difference that everybody cares about. Leverage is looking for how do I help expose a material problem or a material improvement that really makes a difference. That's the stuff we can really get people to buy into. That takes curiosity first. You know, resisting the I know better. They know their system in ways that you don't. They know their system in ways that you don't, no matter how much we think we know. If we go back to this analogy of, you know, we're all therapists in the room and I've handed out these cards. There are all kinds of reasons why people would probably not buy into that. If we're talking about a family, let's say I walked into somebody's house, right? You know, well, assuming we could do that, right? We do the mask thing and whatever, right? You ask me in and say, hey, you know, we got this issue, can you help? And I walk in the door and I look around for 3 minutes and I say, oh yeah, your Uncle Herbie? Yeah, I can fix him in 4 weeks, it'll be fine. Only you've known Uncle Herbie for what, 20, 30, 50, 60 years? You know that system really well and you know it ain't getting fixed in 4 weeks. Right? This is, how many organizations are we in where it's essentially a family system? Right? I mean, most companies I work in, you ask people how long they've been there 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. That group of product owners I talked about, we went to dinner. I happened to ask, how long have you guys worked for the company? You know, I thought I'd hear a range like the numbers I just tossed out. And nobody said anything. And the first person to speak was one of the guys who said, well, I guess I'm the newbie. I mean, you know, through various acquisitions and stuff, but I guess I'm the newbie. I've been here 27 years. The manager of the group had been 32. And there was one person who was about to retire, had been with the same company, you know, again, through acquisitions for 45 years. Asserting that I know their system, walking in the door with all of that history, not kind of sensible, right? So when we're working in companies, we have to assume that they have systems and pieces and things going on that we don't know about. If we approach with curiosity, why does this work this way? Why doesn't it work that way? Who decides how this works? It's amazing what you can bubble up about all of these things we've been talking about, the network structures, the connections, the leverage points, the stories. And it's all for free. People are happy to talk about it. All they need is for you to ask. Thoughts, questions? Is this a different way of looking at what we're doing than what we've been doing?
So I'm curious as to how you deal with it's always been that way. And, oh, we tried this other thing, but that didn't work, so we're not going to do that again.
So it's always been this way. I might ask, why has it always been this way? It's sort of stay with curiosity versus force. If it's always been this way, there's a reason. And if we probe enough, if you probably have heard of the 5 whys, you know, you keep play 3-year-old, keep asking why until people like throw up their hands. But you know, why has it always worked this way? Well, because blah 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 blah. Okay, well, do you have any idea who decided it should be this way? How long has it been this way? Are there good things about it being this way? That's, by the way, sort of, if you've ever read The Art of War, you know, use the strength of your opponent against them. This is not an opponent thing, but the phrase is kind of interesting. You know, that, well, okay, you're insisting this is the way. What's good about this? Which helps them to tell you, how does their system work and what do they think is the win about the way it is? If we try to fight that, it's not going to happen. Does that help, John? I think there was a second question.
Yeah, so yeah, I've lost it. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
It'll come back to me.
Yep. Yeah, and it's really, and it's funny because, so what I just modeled for you was this slide, right? It was, how do you deal with, and by the way, I didn't do it on purpose. It's sort of reflexive at this point. Is, you know, how do you deal with this thing that could be oppositional? And I went into curiosity mode. Okay.
So, and we've, the other question is that we've tried it this other way before, and that didn't work. So we're not going back there again.
Yeah. So one of the questions I would ask is, what did you think you were trying to solve for? What was the problem you were trying to solve? And what were the side effects? So this, I'm not sure, I don't think I have this in this deck. There's this concept of perfect answer versus everything's okay and it's got different side effects. You know, it's sort of like, I wish I could attribute this quote, every model is wrong, but some are useful. Right? So rather than what's the right answer, well, okay, to John, maybe to your point, what I might do is say, hey, what are all the things you've tried? Maybe they all failed. Let's look at each of those things and what side effects did they have, the plus and the minus. Because I look at those decisions as helping people to think through 4 or 5 options. What are the side effects and which set of side effects are the ones you prefer? It gets people out of what's right and wrong and more into understanding that everything has side effects. It's just a question of which ones you happen to prefer in terms of what they do. And that takes some of the emotion also out of the, you know, if people are driven by, is it right? Is it wrong? Well, okay, what are we trying to do? Which of the things we could do would maybe get us to move the ball a couple inches or a foot that direction, even if it's not perfect? Are they better than the other things we could do with less bad side effects? Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
So there's another question that I actually wanted to make this comment before, and I think that's what you were, I just didn't get a chance. A lot of times, people had very valid reasons for doing things the way that they did them, but those reasons are no longer there and no longer valid. So every now and then you need to question, why were those things there? I've got this long funny joke about this married couple, and the guy, his favorite dinner is like his wife makes his baked ham, but he always cuts the ends off, and she always cuts off the end. They don't know why. He says, "Oh, my mom always did it, and my mom always did it." So finally, she calls her grandmother. "Why did you cut the ends off the ham?" She says, "Because my pan was too small."
Oh, right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And this is why, by the way, to your point, David, this is why this resonates with me. Have you ever questioned the nature of your reality?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think what we're all saying is, how do we get there? So the curiosity first. I would be remiss in an Agile group of not talking about, as another way of helping people to get there, empirical methods. They're the core to Agile, no matter what you're doing. Scrum, Kanban, XP, it's all empirical stuff. It's core to Agile and social proof without the politics. Does anybody know what does social proof mean to you? Anybody heard about that? A couple of you I know have done marketing stuff from the books you've talked about. Anybody? So it's like social proof might be, hey, they did it and it worked. Or John's point of they did it and it blew up, right? The social proof is somebody else illustrated whether this is a good idea or not. Well, the good thing about social proof is if you think that person's a good person, that social proof is positive. If you have an issue with that person, the social proof could go negative, even if it's really data-wise the right thing. The nice thing about data, it doesn't carry any of that payload. Data can be social proof without the politics of what's the right thing to do. And that's really the empirical improvement piece of doing things with data to understand or to inform what good choices might look like. But your data must be defensible. What defensible data is and how to enable is sort of a whole other discussion. Happy to have that. But getting to the place where your data is defensible is really important. What I mean by defensible, it could be wrong. It could be wrong by 5, 10, 15%, some number like that. But it's right enough that it's hard to claim that the conclusion the data points at is invalid. If your data only shows a 1% improvement, you're going to get kind of laughed out of the room because everybody knows your data could be wrong by 1%. If the data is convincing and defensible and shows a 40% shift, it's kind of hard to argue with because even if you're wrong by 2 times, it's still a 20% gain. Right? So that's another example of a material problem, a material solution. It's something that moves the dial enough that it's a big deal and people sort of just say, of course, that makes sense. And I'm sure there's somebody in the group who's thinking to themselves, okay, I get that I can't push, but really, how do I convince them? Well, you can't. I got bad news for you. You can't, at least not in a way that will stick. You can get compliance, but you can't get change. This is hard to come to terms with. It's taken me a long time to come to terms with the fact that I cannot make change happen.
Well, it's easy to use compliance to do Agile. It's hard to get compliance to be Agile.
Right. I mean, in the very simplest of form, exactly, David, right? We're talking about self-organizing teams. If the team's fundamental story is a compliance story, how can they be self-organizing? They can't. That's another piece of, by the way, what I mean about story, right? Teams have stories about who they are. that are kind of useful to expose. And even, for instance, I've literally done this with teams and said, okay, I know you might have not thought about this before, but let's take a few minutes. Maybe it's during a retro, maybe it's just a discussion. If you were to make up a story about this team as a team, what would that story be? What would that be like? It's amazing the stuff you hear. So you can't. You can help them to decide they want to change and that they want your help in trying to get there. How? Find their material problems. Show a straight line, defensible path to improvement with objective measures that matter to them. And if they don't see your solution as believable or material, it's your problem to solve, not theirs. This is another hard lesson, really hard lesson. They don't get it. They're dense. They're wrong. But anytime we get onto that talk track, you got to back up and think, wait a minute, who am I in service of right now? Oops, it's me, not them. Okay. If I'm in service of them, I have to figure out a way to have this be believable and material. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're right about their system and I'm wrong. Rinse and repeat. So can we convince people? No, but we can get there. And if we get there this way, it takes hold really strongly. And they'll start pulling you along, which is where we wanted to be in the first place. Couple more things. I get this question a lot. How do I measure Agile progress? I'm sure you do too. How do we know we're doing it right? How do we know we're doing well? How do we know Agile is going well? The subtext is, how do we know the millions of dollars we're spending on all of you is worth something? Can anybody guess what my answer to that might be? If you're going to channel Joel, what do you suspect my answer might be?
The bottom line.
Bottom line? What kind of bottom line?
Well, if it's really fundamental, the profit of the company. Maybe one can make it more specific, but.
Okay. So let me, by the way, I had to put in the first sentence. Sorry, asking how do I measure Agile progress is to have already lost.
Ooh.
Well, I mean, you have to define what metrics you want to maximize, what, KPIs, whatever.
Right.
But you have to agree on them ahead of time and take metrics beforehand, so
right.
you have something to compare to. But it's going to vary from company to company what they're trying to maximize.
Sure. I'm going to say something that is going to get people to throw things at me. Most Agile metrics are non-material to the business. They don't matter to business success. That's actually why the first line is there.
I can see your point there, Joel. But I also can see that if the Agile teams are delivering at an incremental basis for the features that the business needs, I think that's a big step too.
Right. And I guess I am not trying to say that team metrics and classic Agile metrics are valueless. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is this is not a judgment, it's an observation that most Agile metrics are non-material to the business in the way we've talked about material change. That in other words, we all know you could double the velocity of a team and you haven't really affected the company in a way that matters at all. By gaming the numbers, by all kinds of other stuff, right? So if that's the case, and by the way, it's true that some flow-based metrics may be material. Some of those are actually very useful, flow rates and things like that. However, it's been my experience that most are rendered non-material by structural problems. In other words, the things about the way the data is structured, the way that we conceptualize the work, But of all of them, the flow metrics are the ones that are, to me, most often to be able to be material. To me, the best measure of Agile progress is don't be an enabler for measuring Agile. Measure what they say matters to business success and demonstrate improvement. And show that it is tightly correlated to the Agile processes and work and things we're doing. We can't show causation, we can show correlation. And business success is measured in defensible data, not IT vanity metrics. I promised this would be challenging. I did promise that. So we're almost there. I've been very purposeful about how the language I've been using in this talk, because I've experienced some patterns when talking about this a different way with folks in the Agile community. By the way, that's not me as an outsider, right? I've been in the Agile community for a long time and with this group, but in particular, when I talk to folks who are in this community, I can sometimes get some interesting blowback. You know, there must be a name for what we've been talking about, right? Anybody have any thoughts about what the name for that might be?
Common sense.
Common sense.
Systems thinking.
Systems thinking. I have a surprise for you.
Behavioral psychology.
Behavioral psychology.
Appropriate mindset.
Appropriate mindset.
Business improvement.
Business improvement. I have a slightly different phrase for you. What I think I've just given you is sort of a high-level overview of a 101/201 class in advanced network sales techniques. You know, we as Agilists, you know, the reason I didn't use the word sales up until this point is that that's not what we do. That's like the guy with the cigar in the car parking lot, right? But what I'm talking about is actually what advanced enterprise sales is about. And this is where I was coming from at the very beginning, that this concept that coaching is the solution set for these problems, maybe that's not the solution set for these problems. This is the core playbook of advanced sales techniques. It turns out, and I have, you know, Amy mentioned purple squirrel. I mentioned that to her. It's like, you know, I've had several recruiters call me a purple squirrel because of my background. You know, it's like I have these various chunks that have been interwoven. It turns out that for a couple of years, I worked for Rally Software. They make one of the agile management platforms, right? I was a solution architect. So I was working with front-facing customers as a coach and also as a platform support and deeply embedded with one of our sales teams. And as part of that, they put us through some advanced sales training. And I practiced. You kind of had to, right? We're dealing with large companies. I was in front of the big, you know, the enterprise companies every day, every other day for a couple of years with deals that were in the large numbers. And watched the reps for how they did their stuff. And it forever changed the way I approach this concept of coaching and agile transformation in companies. So for me, I figure maybe it's safe at this point to use the S word. That for me, I very carefully think about what I'm looking at in terms of opposition, concern, constraints, things like that in an enterprise system or a small business system, to think about, is this a coaching problem or is it a sales problem? In many cases, the things that frustrate us as coaches, they're frustrating because we're trying to use a screwdriver on something we need a hammer for, or whatever tooling choices you want to make. We're trying to solve a sales problem with coaching techniques. Yeah, that can work but it's not the straight line. So, yeah, it's funny. Jonathan said, now to convince my company I should get compensation for being in sales. You know, but part of the reason I didn't use the word sales is just that it triggers so many negative reactions, right? But sales is basically about helping people to come to the conclusion they can't live without your stuff. How different is that than what we're talking about? So here's just as a quick example, right? If you walked into a, let's say you walked into a, you accidentally in a fugue state, you accidentally walked into a car dealership on a Saturday afternoon, you know, busy day of the week. You had no intent to buy a car. You just somehow ended up in the showroom. And all of a sudden, the salesman is trying to pitch you on all the great things you can do with this car, and they're interviewing you on, you know, like, what would you want in a car? What are your car goals? What would your reaction to that be? What do you think might come out of your mouth? You know, let's be PC, but or family safe, right?
I don't know. I've never thought about it.
Yeah, and if you really had no intent to buy a car, like you just bought a car yesterday, and the person kept going after you about, tell me about, you know, your car problems and how can I help you solve your car problems?
I'm not interested. I don't want it. Don't bother me.
Right. This is kind of what happens.
I'm just here for the free coffee.
I'm here for the free cover of the donuts, right? There was a great Saturn ad years ago about the free donuts, right?
Joe, depend on the salesperson. This thing actually happened with me practically, and then I came up with the car.
Okay, so they were a good sales rep.
So they were a good sales rep.
Yeah, I actually knew somebody who was in car sales, and you know, I'd occasionally get a text from her that said, "Yeah, one of my long-term customers came in for an oil change, and I accidentally sold them a new car." Yeah, so, you know, and so David, you know, sales is convincing them to become more agile. Coaching is helping them to get there once they've decided, right? Yeah. So this is talking about that early game, the early funnel, as they call it in the sales business. I guess one of the things I hope that you take out of this is that those techniques are not necessarily foreign to what we do. And in fact, starting to learn that stuff can give you incredible power in doing the things we do. In the work that I'm doing currently, which is in one of the large banks, a couple of the people I'm working with have said repeatedly, I'm not making this up, over the last few weeks, is, Joel, I have no idea how you do this, but you just make stuff happen that nobody thought could happen. And it's by applying this stuff so that we can get to the place that then we can do the coaching. So given that it's an Agile event, I feel like I should ask, how did we do? Was this a valuable use of your time?
Yeah.
Are there things we could have done to make it better for you? Well, not an overwhelming list of improvements we need to make. Sorry, go ahead.
Deliver pizza.
Deliver pizza. Well, I had pizza in one of the slides. Yeah. So, and I would be remiss if I didn't say, as is in the slide, please get in touch if you'd like to build your capacity to do this stuff reflexively and fluidly. I do coaching for coaches, scrum masters, product owners, and companies. And this stuff is learnable. It's absolutely learnable. And there's a whole other suite. As you can probably tell, this is sort of scratching the surface of a big topic. There's a whole bunch of stuff about interaction styles and things like that, being able to decode what's going on in the room in front of you. It's just insanely useful in figuring out what's the next step. So, thank you very much for having me in. It's fun.
Thanks, Joel, so much for that. I would love to see a part 2 where
Okay.
you do some like real life scenarios. You know, this is what I was faced with. This is how I handled it. I would love to see how you, I mean, you laid the foundation. So if you would be open to doing a part 2 on real world and how I handled it, I would love to hear that.
Sure.
That would be great.
Yeah, and frankly, I think one of the pieces, what I was thinking about actually is another piece would be, when I put the deck together, it's like, man, you always wish you had more time and more slides and more, yeah, right? There are pieces of this that I'd love to like do some workshop-y style exercises around, right? Because I felt like I needed to paint the big picture for you so that you could see how it all fit together, and that would just barely fit in the time box we had. But for instance, being able to sit down as a group and talk about organizational systems, networks, this idea of the nodes and leverage stuff, some of the communication stuff. Yeah, sure, that'd be cool.
Joel, one of the things that I think would be useful is handouts. I saw all your slides, and I guess the slides will become available, and video of the session will become available. But I think that in order to go over it by myself, slides don't actually have enough of the content. But handouts with sort of checklist-ish things or things that come closer to the script of what you said would be useful, so I could review it.
So I haven't written a book. I don't have handouts. I could start trying to put some of that stuff together. I'm going to challenge again. Part of the reason I don't do handouts like that is I don't think it's in service of the people I'm working with. Because the challenge is not the knowing, it's the capacity to be able to do it. And so from here, really the reason I went to the workshop-y kind of stuff is that there are a lot of people who like hear about this, they look at it, they read a book, and they say, oh yeah, I got that. And then I'll construct a tiny role play, a couple sentences, and they don't have the capacity to execute. It's funny, even as a coach, a scrum master, product owner, if it's the capacity to deliver this stuff in the wild in front of people, that's the only way we generate value. Knowing it doesn't generate any value. So I'm not trying to put down what you asked for. I just don't have handouts to hand out. The slides, I think, will be provided, right? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, if you provide them, we'll have them on the website.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide them.
Excellent.
The slides actually do have a good amount of it. I think it's being recorded, so you could certainly review the recording. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, if you'd like some coaching on helping to figure this out for yourself, I'm happy to have a discussion.
So along those lines and kind of what Dave Rosenberg was asking for, I want to mention, so I went through the IC Agile coaching certification. And one of the most valuable things that I learned in there is, as an Agile coach, you're actually in all of these different modes at different times. And this is a big part of knowing what mode you should be in the right time, how to tell when you should be in that mode, and how to transition to that mode. And a lot of that is, should I be mentoring now? Should I be doing right now? Should I be training right now? Or should I be selling right now? And that's a big part of that Agile coaching certification. And I liked it because it wasn't about tell us the basics of Agile. It's tell us the basics of coaching.
Yeah. So I feel like then I have to ask the question, should I put together an actual class around this?
Yeah.
I haven't yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thumbs up.
All right.
Yeah, I think there's a real need in our group to have more network stuff, more whole organization stuff.
Yep. Okay. Cool.
Especially some of those surprise questions you asked with weird answers.
I'm glad you liked it. So, yeah, by the way, I want to really appreciate everybody being so engaged in actually being in on the discussion. It really makes it a much more interesting thing for me and positive. So, thank you.
Joel, I wholeheartedly agree with you that workshops are very useful, and I guess I do not believe that the handouts that I was talking about would be a substitute. I think that
Oh, yeah.
handouts would be a good preface or a good preparation before the workshop.
Yep.
But I agree with you. The workshop has more weight, but the workshop will work better if people understand what they're doing there.
Right, right. For instance, one of the things, one of the exercises I've done with folks is this question of, what's a material problem? Because very often we'll think, oh, this is important to the company. And you sort of toss something out that, of course, this matters, right? Like, we could get into the big velocity argument, right? Velocity, right? Of course that matters. Okay. Does that matter to the CEO? Does it matter to Wall Street? Does it actually represent things that make the company more money? So it's that kind of discussion thing. But agreed on the handout part. I mean, I'm being quite transparent in that I just don't have that stuff together yet. I've thought for a while that this is a hole in our business, this understanding of sales and how that fits in the non-icky, forced, used car sales kind of way. And I've been exploring the idea of, well, maybe it is a hole and maybe I should try to help people and put something together. So I just thank you for probing about the worksheets, and I'm not there yet, but it sounds like I should get there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Thank you so much.